It had all come down to Irwin's own testimony. 5 nightmarish months of high-profile court case in which his life was laid bare like a laboratory exhibit and washed with stain that allowed only one interpretation: terrorist. And all because he'd suggested a use for some cash left over at the end of a tech conference. He looked up from the Bible beneath his hand and then over at the judge. His throat was dry from sitting for so long beside his court-appointed lawyer, agape at the fabricated version of his life that had been reeled out by the prosecution. "I do. You may take the stand." The state's attorney, a white-haired man named Ralph Glendon, who had the bearing of a general and the guile of a used car salesman, rose and started towards him. "Mr. Forrester," he said calmly, "the court has heard a great many expert witnesses in this case. Some of them have spoken to your character, or lack of it." Irwin's lawyer, a petite fireball named Susan Wright, rose partway out of her chair. "Objection. Conclusionary." "Sustained." The judge cast a weary glance at Glendon. "Others," he continued unabated, "have described the horrendous result of your actions. They have laid out clearly and unambiguously the details of how the river surge that you caused to be set into motion was responsible for the destruction of a major coastal city, a shipping port that suffered damage which was measured not just in dollars but in lives. What we haven't heard to this point is why you did it." Irwin pounced. In the scant pause, he came alert and said, "Thank you for asking." Susan Wright might not have had the years of experience that informed the prosecutor's judgment, but she more than made up for it in her grasp of psychology, and in particular the psychology of a certain high-profile prosecutor. When they discussed today's testimony, she told him to listen carefully to Glendon's phrasing, because he had a tendency to make sloppy linguistic mistakes. If Irwin could interpret a preparatory remark as a request for information and immediately start replying, the prosecutor wouldn't get the chance to finish framing his question and couldn't lay a trap. Judge Hu had allowed it before, and she was certain he'd do it again. Glendon, who had just drawn breath to continue, closed his eyes in painful realization of the error. He wasn't likely to repeat the mistake any time soon. "In order for me to explain why I made that suggestion," Irwin said, "you have to understand what the conference was really all about. The way your experts described it was completely wrong. We're not a bunch of hackers getting drunk and hatching violent schemes, as it was put recently. The purpose of the conference is to provide a venue, a context, for a group of technically educated analysts to look at the nation's infrastructure as if it were a machine. The piecemeal way that it was designed and constructed hides a great deal of the way it behaves as a whole. We prefer to call ourselves civil ecologists." "Okay," the prosecutor said, "I'll accept that characterization. It's certainly a lot easier to grasp what a civil ecologist is than the long-winded titles we have heard bandied about here. Go on." Irwin glanced at his lawyer. Happily, she did not appear to be suppressing panic. "Well, sir, because we intentionally look at the infrastructure as a machine, we notice the interactions that are possible when they intersect with one another. In some cases, these interactions form what could be described as a cascade of events, much like the seemingly chaotic behavior of our Rube Goldberg device." Glendon nodded. "Yes, I don't think we need to revisit the disastrous demonstration of how Healy Dam shattered Conestoga Gas's main pipeline when it failed. We're well aware of how that slow-motion train wreck proceeded. But you were 1,000 miles north of there." "I was. But when you're looking at the interactions among bits of the national infrastructure, distances can be deceiving. It's not as important where a thing is physically as how they are connected through social structures, communications networks, and so forth. It's really quite complex. We take it as a challenge to understand how these systems of systems behave. One way to describe such causal cascades is by sketching out a path of probable outcomes. Those sketches frequently look startlingly like the contraptions that Goldberg grew, or like the ones which students from all over the world spend their times either building for real or in simulation." "And these Rube Goldberg contraptions," Glendon said, "the ones designed by students, Do they ever have destructive purposes? Not to my knowledge, sir. But the event cascades, as you call them, that you sketch out, Mr. Forrester, they do have potentially destructive results? That is true. But you see, sir, unlike those students, we don't construct anything. What we do is to identify them as they occur in the world. We just point them out. A murmur swept the room. One of the claims that had been made against Irwin was that he was the organizer of a terror cell. I must interrupt you there, Mr. Forrester, the prosecutor said, one hand raised theatrically. He was standing beside his table, looking down at some notes. What you have just admitted to, that you don't personally set these causal cascades in motion, supports the accusation that you were in fact one of the ringleaders, and that you directed others to carry out your destructive plans. Irwin's lawyer paled. Objection, Your Honor. My client did not admit to conspiracy. Move to strike. I didn't accuse him of it. I merely noted that his statement supports that Judge Hughes spoke over Glendon. Both counsel, please approach the bench. The prosecutor had his back to the witness stand, so Irwin couldn't make out what he said to the judge. But when the whispering was finished and the attorneys returned to their places, the defense counsel looked like she'd gotten the better of the deal. Glendon asked him to continue. As I was saying, we don't create these event cascades. We don't set them in motion. All we do is point them out. It's like noticing that your teacup would fly across the room if something fell on the spoon, only on a much larger scale. To whom, then, do your colleagues typically point these cascades out?